back to week 4 with Now Dev Notes and me, Faith, your key study partner. Last week we focused on how to build tables to hold our data. We also covered how to even start an application inside a studio. This week we're focusing on how do we interact with the tables and their data? And the answer is through forms. We will be creating forms and modifying forms for a positive user experience and extending and creating new functionality within those forms through scripting. So let's go ahead and get started. So forms. Forms are the primary way that users interact with an application's tables. Forms allow users to view a record and modify it, and also create a completely new record within a table. Every time a table is created, a form is created by default. It's made with a standard layout and a default view. Each table is associated with a form. Each field within the form is related to a column from the table. So that is where the form is able to get its information for it to be made. So once you select a record from a table, a form is what displays all of the information from that record. So if you're looking at a record and you decide that you want to configure it because you realize you missed some things and there are ways to optimize it, all you have to do is right-click on that form's header. Go down to configure, and then from there you have two options. Either you can do form layout or choose form design. And form design is what we will be using.
I have a room request form that was created automatically when the room request table was made. So here are a few key things that I think can be helpful to ensure that this form is successful. So the first thing is the requested by field is low. And that's not good because the important field should be at the top. They should be higher within the form. The thing is the room field is not mandatory right now because again, mandatory fields are highlighted using this red asterisk. So I also will be going in to ensure that the room is mandatory. And I also will be editing the start time label for this field because it's not only the start time, but it also is the date. And finally, I'm going to edit the overall flow of this form. So let's go ahead and do that. To configure this form, I'm going to right click on the form's header, go down to configure, and then you either can select form design or form layout. I will be using form design because form design is actually what you will see when you are in Studio. So once in form design, you'll see the header, we have the navigator again, and now we're able to drag and drop the different fields using the handles. So I'm first going to begin by moving the requested by field to the top of my form. I also am going to go ahead and change this label. And the way that you do this is by clicking on the gear, which will lead you to the properties of that field. And then you can just type in what you want it to be. So I'm going to type start time and date. Also, I'm going to go ahead and move these around again using the handles so that way everything is in place for where I want it to be. And I want to move the start date up. And you just, to move the start time and date up, you just drag it wherever you want it to be. And then I also want to have the duration over here on the left side, again, just as I think about how I would want to fill out a form or how I want my user to fill out the form. And then on the right side, once you have locked in those key details on the left, then on the right side, you'll have your number of attendees and then the purpose. Also make sure that the room is mandatory by, again, clicking on that properties icon. And we have all these options here and clicking mandatory. And then I click save. And I will go back into the main ServiceNow tab and refresh. And now everything that I just changed is here. And I have a optimal flow. And I have my room is mandatory. I was able to change the label. And now I believe that my user will have a better experience when they are filling out their room request form.
So views. Views allow different users to see the same form, but in different formats or different versions. This is important because it allows me to be able to create a form, which, for example, a manager could see the form and see different fields in it, and then an employee can see that same form, but might not see everything that the manager sees. And so that makes it more efficient because I don't have to build an entirely new form. And inside of the form has a name, which is database friendly, but then it also has a title, which is more user friendly. And so views are always going to be important and useful in our form creation experience.
I will now be creating an admin view. So to create a new view within Studio, just make sure you're within the form that you want to be configuring. And then you click on where it says default view, and then you click on new. The view name, I'm just going to call this the admin view. And now we just can start configuring this because now this will be what the admin sees. And so I will keep the request number and the requested by and the room because that is still important. I also will have a start date, but I'm going to move that over here. And then I'm going to add a new column again by going to field types. And this will be a date and time. And I'm going to drag and drop. And I can now make this will be end time and date, and I want it to be mandatory. And I will take away the duration because admin does not have a duration limit for booking a room. And then I have the number of attendees, which is also not going to be necessary, and then the purpose. So right now, this purpose is a string, but I'm instead going to configure it. I'm going to take out this purpose and I'm going to instead make it a choice just to make this quicker for this admin view. And the name will still be purpose. It will be a choice, be mandatory. And down here, we can go ahead and add the choice. So the choice will just be if it's an emergency meeting. And then I can close out. And then I click save. And so now I have an admin view, and then I have the default view. And now I can go into a record, right click on the header, go to the view, and go to admin view so I can see it in a different way. And then I also can right click, go to view, and go back to the default view.
When we are working in our forms, we can decide that we want to either extend the functionality that the form has and take it even further, or just create functionality that's not even quite there yet. And the way that that happens is through scripting. So really we're focusing on two types. So client-side scripts execute in the browser, and we also have server-side scripts which execute on the ServiceNow server. When we're talking about client-side scripts, we are focusing on scripts that execute in the web browser and they get their data from and have the main focus on fields, forms, and lists. It's all about managing those fields and forms because we want to be able to decrease the amount of time that users spend working in that form. And the two types of client-side scripts that we will focus on are UI policies and client scripts. Let's go ahead and take a look at how I use client-side scripting in my application.
So I'm going to go ahead and make a UI policy. And the way that I'll do that is create application file and just start typing UI policy. And then there it is down at the bottom. They can be basic or advanced. This really is about dynamically changing the form based on how the user interacts with it. So this specific one will focus on this conditionally displaying the description field based on if special requests are needed. So my table is room request. You also see that there is no like actual field name. So we're just going to use the short description. That's where the like kind of name comes from. So the short description will just be, because that's what this one will do based on whether the user says yes or no as to whether they have a special request for the room. So every script has a trigger. It has to have a trigger for it to know when to run, when to start doing this action. So here is where you're going to say what is going to trigger it. So for me, this is all going to be based on the special requests, the room special requests field. And it is yes. So if a user says that they do have a room special request, then that's going to trigger this UI policy. I'm selecting global because this will apply to all of the views. I also will select on load. So as soon as the form loads and the user changes, any of the values is going to execute this UI policy if necessary. And then also we have the reverse if false. So if the conditions evaluate to false, go ahead and reverse what was specified here. And then I'm not going to select inherit because no tables are inherited from this table. So then I'm going to click submit. And then inside of here, I need to specify the UI policy action. So thinking about what do you actually want to do when the room special request is yes. So I'm going to click on new, and the field name is the special request description. It should be mandatory, visible. So it should only be visible if this UI policy is true, if this condition is true. And then read only false. And then I'm going to click submit. Then I'm going to go into the main ServiceNow browser. And I'm inside of my list view. I'm going to click on new. And I'm just going to focus right now on the room special request. So right now you see there is no description field here for the special request because right now the value is none. If I select yes, there it is. Now my UI policy is kicking in and the special request description now displays. And then if I click no, then it disappears. So that is my UI policy. As we continue to work in client-side scripting, the second type that we will talk about is a client script. And to do this, once again in Studio, we'll go to create application file. We'll begin to type client script and we'll click create. This is what the default form will look like, but I already have one created. And remember that client scripts are similar to UI policies in that client scripts also manage the behavior of forms, fields, and lists. And the goal of a client script is to make sure that a user has a positive experience and does not have to waste time in completing the form. So it's all about efficiency. This client script specifically will begin with a name. This is to ensure that the duration field is in 30-minute increments and the duration will not exceed more than 3 hours. You make sure that you select the table. Mine is room request. Again, mine is for the desktop. And then we get to our types. It is important to remember that this script needs a trigger. It needs to know when it runs. And the biggest part of that trigger comes from right here, from the type. So this is the one that I will be using for this client script. And this script will run when the form is either saved, updated, or submitted. Make sure that's active. We don't have to worry about anything being inherited. And then global, once again, for all of our views. Now we get to the script. We'll go into the script in a second. But I also love that if you scroll down, you can see that I've been working on this, but it has all of the versions that you had previously, which is great. And then you can also see the current state as well. So let's get into this code. So you might realize that it looks a little bit different from before. And I just decided to clean up a few things and optimize it just a tad. So you'll see that I took out the parameters just because I was not using them. So it was no point of just having them there. Also, you'll see before I was using a parse float function, but I didn't need it because after I did some console logs, I realized that I always would be getting an integer back. And parse float just ensures that if you do get a string, that it is going to convert it into an integer. So I instead just restated my variable. So my variable name is duration. I'm using the gform API, which again is just the gform object, and I'm accessing the method getValue, and I'm doing that again by placing a period right after the gform object. And for the getValue method, inside of the parentheses, inside of quotes, you have to specify what value you want from the form, what field. And this is important to pay attention to because I would think that the name is duration. But if I actually go, and I did go back and look at the field, when I hovered over it, and I did a right click, I see that it's actually called U_decimal_1. So that is actually the column name. And if you wanted to see it further, you could also do configure dictionary, but it's right there, U_decimal_1. So be careful when you're just like assuming that it should be something, because it might not be. So always double check that everything is what you expect it to be. So the duration name is actually u_decimal_1. So I have that there. And then after I finish declaring it, I close it with a semicolon. I then am going to have some if logic. And remember that this is the condition that I'm checking for inside of this if logic. So I'm saying when I have the duration, which I already have from line 2, and I am using something called the modulus operator. And what this does is takes the duration and divides it by 0.5, because remember, I'm using half-hour increments or hourly increments. And what the modulus operator does ensures that once the division happens, it just returns the remainder. So I'm checking here to see if the duration, when I am dividing it by 0.5 and getting the remainder, if it is not equal to 0. And again, the reason why I'm saying it's not is because I have this exclamation in front of these equal signs. So this first condition is checking, is the remainder of the duration divided by 0.5, is it not equal to 0? And then I have what is called the logical OR operator. So it's basically separating my two conditions that I'm checking. So I have condition 1, and my second condition is going to check if the duration is greater than 3, because I don't want that to happen. So again, it's checking first to see if when the duration is divided by 0.5, if that remainder is not equal to 0. And then it's also checking if the duration itself is greater than 3. So that is the condition that is being checked here. So if those things are happening, which again, those are things that I do not want, if those things are happening, then I have declared a variable called error message with the error message that I want to show. And once again, I'm accessing the gform object. Specifically, this time I'm using the show field message method. And inside of the show field message, inside of the parentheses, you have to put the name of the field. Again, be careful. Like I said, double check that. But that is mine for the duration field. And then I have the error message, which comes from line 4. This is just what I want it to actually say. And then you also have to put the type of message that you want. So I want this to be an error message. And that goes inside quotations as well. Return false, which means if this condition is happening, display the error message. And then I'm going to ensure returning false means do not submit that form. You will not be able to submit the form until these conditions are not happening. So this code block will only execute if this condition is happening in this if statement. If that condition is not happening, then this whole code block will be skipped and we will go straight to return true, or the code will go straight to return true, and the user will be able to submit the form with no problems. So now that the script is complete, I'll make sure to click update. So now let's go into the main ServiceNow browser so we can see how that looks. So I have my form here. Again, it's always important to reload the page to ensure that everything that happened in Studio is now in the current browser. So I'm just going to fill in something quick. I have now filled out my form, and now it is time for the duration part. So in the duration, I might type 7 and click submit. And now you see my error message here, which displays under the field saying that it must be in 30-minute or hourly increments and no more than 3 hours. Because, and again, if I do 7 divided by 0.5, I'm going to get a remainder that is not 0. And it's also more than 3. But if I also try 2.25 and I click submit again, I'm still going to get that error message, and it's not going to work, because while it is less than 3, I'm still getting a remainder that's not 0. But if I try maybe just 2, click submit, there we go. It is created and ready to go.
And now we have server-side scripts. Server-side scripts execute on the server. They tend to be used more for security purposes because they are more secure and data validation. I'm going to take a look at how I can incorporate them into my application.
So I am now doing some server-side scripting. So as we know, we go to create application file and then business rule and then create. So I'm going to go over two that I made. The first basic one is just an auto population business rule, which allows as soon as a form is loaded. So that is why I chose a display trigger, because remember, every script needs a trigger. So as soon as the form is loaded, I want the currently logged in user to become the requested by fields value. And so I selected the table, make sure it's active, and you have to make sure you select advanced because that is what is going to allow the scripting capabilities. So again, I chose display. We have the others that could have been selected before, after, and async. And then in the advance, I'm going to talk about my script. So the function that I have is called an immediately invoked function, and that is designated by saying that the function is wrapped in parentheses. This makes sense because, again, this is a display business rule, so we want this function to be invoked or start working right when that form loads. So this function is called execute rule. And we have the current parameter, which is just the current record that this business rule is executing on. I took out the other parameter just because I wasn't using it. And then inside of the body, I have some if conditional logic. So I'm saying if current, which again is our current record, dot is new record. So the is new record method is just checking to make sure that this is a new record. And if it is, it will return true. And so if this condition returns true, then we're going to take the current record and we're going to set the value. We're going to use the set value method to set the requested by field to be the current user ID. And this is happening because GS, which stands for Glide System, which has many great benefits, but this object allows us to return the sysid of the currently logged in user. So we're just setting it to the currently logged in user, and then we are also, again, down here passing our function, the two parameters, but again, I'm going to take out previous because I don't need it. So I'm only going to pass it current. And then we are done. And click update. And what this looks like in the browser, I'm in my list view and I want to create a new room request. And as soon as I click new, my name is System Administrator and it is automatically populated thanks to my business rule. So this is my second business rule. It is the capacity verification to ensure that the request amount of people is not greater than the capacity of the room. So again, this is going to be on the room request table. Make sure it's active and advanced needs to be selected so that scripting can take place. This will be a before business rule because I want to make sure that this executes before any inserting or updating of the record takes place. And then in the advanced tab, this is where the scripting is taking place. So this is another immediately invoked function, as we see, because it is wrapped in parentheses. It's called the execute rule function and is being passed a current parameter. Remember that current is the actual record that this business rule is running on. So that is room request. So I've declared a variable called room ID, and it takes the current record, which again is room request, and it accesses just the room field. And then I also have another variable called room record, and this is accessing not the room request table, but the room table. And this can happen because the way that a script accesses a ServiceNow table that is not what we initially used, which again was room request, the way that that script accesses another table is by using a glide record class, by instantiating a new instance of the glide record class, and it references the new table. So inside of the parentheses gives us the table name that we want to reference. So this basically makes a connection between a new Glide record instance and the new table. So this is our reference to our room table. And then we have some conditional logic. So if the room table, so we're in the room table, if inside that room table we can find the room that is coming from our room request, then we're going to do this logic. We're going to go ahead and get the room's capacity. We're going to get the attendee number. And then we have one more nested if statement. If the number of attendees, and again, that's for our request, is greater than our room's capacity, then we're going to abort the action that we're doing right now. We want to stop it. It can't go any further, and we're going to print out an error message. Otherwise, if we can't even find the room, we're going to tell the user that the room does not exist. And so let's take a look to see what this looks like in the ServiceNow browser. Also, I've commented out the gs.info here, but that is great for debugging, so you can see what's being produced from your script. Now that I have clicked update in Studio, I'm now in a new record and I've refreshed the page. I filled in my information. This room 200 can only hold 10 people, but I have selected that I need 15 people. So when I click submit, I will get my error messages thanks to my business rule that says the number of attendees exceeds the capacity of the selected room. This action was stopped and nothing was added to the database. Business rules are so important when doing our server-side scripting, and we've seen just how it can help make our forms even more impactful and provide real-time messaging to the users. With all of the great work that has been done in our forms and with our scripting, please do not forget to go into source control and commit those changes because we definitely want them to stay. And then make sure you click continue. The commit for me will just be and commit files. Wonderful. All that great work was backed up on GitLab.
And just like that, we made it through. We were able to find out what a form is and how to create these forms and configure them so that we ensure that a user has a seamless user experience as they view a record, modify a record, or just create a new record altogether. We also were able to extend our forms functionality through client-side scripts and find out what those were, and server-side scripts and find out what those were as well. Our application is starting to look pretty good. And as I always say, see you next week.